Okay, so for some reason, the last video did very well. So I'm going to be pushing the video that I was currently working on, the next one. And this video is a slight sequel for the last one. Last time I did a very long but lazy video on new matchups for every series in Death Battle. However, today, we're going to watch Mojo 10 matchups that I like very much. So, play the intro.
Done, huh?
Welcome to Flashbacks.com. Today we're going to be counting on the top 10 Death Battle matchups I want to see. Like the last video, the same rules are going to apply, except I can only reuse only 2 characters, and I'm not going to be reusing the same series. Alright, let's hop into this. Jesus Christ, that was a terrible intro. Well, you see, that ending was indeed a teaser, but the Nostalgia Critic is one of the most recognizable critics of all of YouTube. So, let's throw him in the wheel and see who he fights. Nostalgia Critic versus the AVGN. This is one of the oldest and best matchups for both of them, and to see them duke it out in Death Battle would just be really neato. But when it comes to stats, both of them can be absurd. For example, AVGN was able to do, this bullshit. However, when it comes to Nostalgia Critic, he was able to blow up a Dwarf Star, and he has hacks, so I would say it levels the playing field. I would love for this to be a live action, but anything could work. And speaking of the fight, this would be the most chaotic shit show they would have ever done. Also, the track could be called Nostalgia Nerd. In fact, I unironically talked about Nostalgia Critic for about a minute. It makes me kind of sad. Now with Medic, there are not very many matchups outside of Overwatch. Mercy is the obvious pick, but no, it's boring and Medic stomps. Moira is another character that is thrown around a bit and has a bit more connections, but it doesn't vibe what I'm looking for. So, who I'm putting the German doctor against? Well, let's find out. Medic versus Richtofen. Basically, not only are they both two crazy German doctors, both also have a knack for dying and coming back to life. Also, both fight inanimate things, with Richtofen fighting zombies and Medic fighting robots. And additionally, they have the connections up that they both use out-of-the-box weapons to defeat their enemies. And finally, they both fight with teams of stereotypes from other countries. So yeah, they both have a good bit of connections. And alongside that, they also have good animation potential compared to Mercy or Moira. And it's mainly due to their wide arsenal. This could be one of the most interesting fights DB has ever done. Medic can bring out his wide variety of miniguns, syringes, and melee weapons, while Ricky Boy can use his wonder weapons. Also, another connection that they both have is they both can revive themselves. However, Richtofen has the benefit of using a gun while he is down. Now when it comes to who wins, I do believe that Medic could just probably overload Rick's heart. However, Richtofen can survive being in the epicenter of a blast that leveled Nuketown, and can use the Annihilator, which was specifically stated to break anyone's arm without augments. But don't be a slouch on Medic, he does have some durability feats on his own. He can survive rockets from Soldier, he can take hits from Erasmus. Also, he does scale to Scout when it comes to speed, so they could probably transfer a couple speed feats that he has. However, I do lean a little bit more towards Richtofen because he has more versatility and probably has more durability, and I can see the reasoning if he does get overloaded, but still, I still think Richtofen would probably win. And finally, completely off topic, but Brandon made a really, really good track. And hopefully they can mimic that in the actual Death Battle. Moving on. Now, Omni-Man has certainly blown up as of late, and now with his newfound popularity, I decided to secure him a spot on here. Who does he fight? Well, let's spin the wheel and we'll find out. Omni-Man vs. Bardock. Now, Nolan's other matchups weren't great, to put it very lightly. Obviously, Homelander vs. Omni-Man is a very popular matchup and is relatively thematic. However, Homelander is building level at best, and while Omni-Man is casually at planet level. I have also seen people throwing him in a battle royale with Homelander, Brightburn, and Titan, which having 3 building level characters go up against a planet buster definitely does not suck up any tension whatsoever. And Bardock's only other matchup is Minato from Naruto, which, I'm sorry James, but the only connection is that they're both Naruto versus Goku, but like dads. However, I've been tiptoeing around the topic. In my last video, I made the joke of Superman versus Goku, but they're assholes. Which today I'm going to elaborate about. Basically, both were asshole dads which had 2 sons. One ended up dying and the other being the savior of the universe. And before that, they were both warriors who kept on dominating planets for a very tyrannical race, who eventually they turned on them due to a factor. Personally, I would love for this fight to be done in either Sprite or 3D, just so I can see some nice hand-to-hand combat between the two. And lastly, before I get into the actual verdict, I would love for the track name to be called something along the lines of like Dads of Justice or something along those lines. Now, unlike Homelander, Bardock is also at around the same level as Omni-Man. Bardock, if very highballed, you can put him around Star to Planetary, which is around Omni-Man's level. And another thing is that he does indeed have Super Saiyan in a non-canon spinoff. However, we do know that Omni-Man is indeed faster because it was very specifically stated that he left the solar system when Mark woke up.
To answer your question, we monitored your father until he left our solar system.
It'd also be very interesting because he has never been shown that he can be challenged by another character, and, well, we can finally see someone fight him at his own level. One last thing before I move on to the next matchup, I think this fight just vibes well to me, you know? But now, let's carry on. Rayquaza is a pretty cool Pokemon, and I wanted to see who the dragon would fight. So, who am I going to pit against the dragon? Well, let's find out. Rayquaza versus Bahamut. Now, Bahamut's other matchups aren't great. I've seen both of them thrown against a matchup with Godzilla, which, no, he's already fought his best opponent. I've also seen both thrown against matchups with Ridley and Mothra, which, one, Mothra is very hard to choreograph, and really doesn't have much connections outside of ha 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 funny dragon. But back on topic. The main connection is that they both are the rulers of the skies in their respective verse. Both are summonable as high level characters in their respective games. Also, both have something to do with weather and giving power. Bahamut gives empowerment to the warriors of light, and Rayquaza and Emerald is the balancing force of the weather trio and can also control the air. Another thing is that they both fight at relatively the same level. Now luckily, Death Battle is already semi-calc numbers for Bahamut, but don't slouch on Rayquaza though. The boy is able to scale to other legendaries like Lunala and Solgeo, who can just zoom through thousands of light years to pop wormholes. And again is also around planet level, with him stopping a meteor that was stated to destroy the world. And another feat to make him around planetary, he was able to beat both Groudon and Kyogre in their primal forms. So yeah, I think it's relative to say that he's around planet level. And another really good thing that makes this fight a little bit more unpredictable is that they both have forms that can up their stats. For example, Rayquaza can go into Mega Evolution, and Bahamut can go into Bahamut Fury. Now, another great thing about this idea is the animation potential. DB has choreographed dragons, but they haven't choreographed 2 of them fighting. And honestly, I don't know how in the hell you would be able to choreograph Rayquaza, but it'd be very interesting and very neat. I want to see how they pull it off. Now, in terms of animation style I would prefer, I would say Sprite, or if they can get a good Rayquaza model, 3D. And like I mentioned last time, Brandon made a really good track on this matchup. So, final verdict is a dragon fight, and I'm happy.
Stop playing around. We want some answers.
You haven't changed.
Wesker, you are alive.
Albert Wesker is a pretty good villain for Resident Evil and one of the best characters from, well, Resident Evil. Now, let's throw him in the wheel and see who we fight for complete global saturation. Albert Wesker versus Kazuya Mishima. Now, you remember in the last video when I said something along the lines of, anyways, what did I pick? Well, I wanted to find a Kazuya matchup, but I couldn't find one. I was sort of lying because there was a matchup I found but I did not like at all. And that being Kazuya versus Rias from High School DxD, which, I don't want to show footage from that show. And also, I don't like her because I don't like the show. But today, it is not a High School DxD rant, it's a Death Battle top 10. And another matchup that I originally had and made a really good thumbnail for was Iori versus Kazuya. But then in the end, I just decided that it was a little too similar to Heihachi versus Geese. And the only other matchup for Kazuya that I could find was Kiryu, which the only connection is that it kind of looks similar. But back on the main subject, the connections between the two are they both were originally the heroes in the first game, but then later on in the series, they became the antagonists. Both killed the head of the company that they soon took control over, and used that said company for their goals of world domination, both gaining a shit ton of power at the cost of their humanity. Both of their final battles were in a volcano, which both of them had to resort to their final form in order to try to beat the person they're fighting. And when they do enter their ultimate form, their eyes start to glow, both have sick-ass trench coats, and finally, both have a long-time rivalry with a certain someone. For Kazuya, it's Heihachi, and for Wesker, it's Chris. Now, in terms of who would win, I think Kazuya would win, because he does indeed outstat Wesker by a lot. However, Wesker does have hacks on his own that could maybe turn the tides. Because one of his abilities is that if he touches anyone with his magic tentacle, they automatically get the Ouroboros disease, which, yeah, that could definitely be very effective. And once again, when it comes down to animation, I would prefer this to be 3D just because they both have really good character models to work with. And also would have nice hand-to-hand combat with a little bit of range. And lastly, the theme. Kings of Iron was really good last time they did it, and well, hopefully they can make a sequel to it. It was a really solid theme. And oh yeah, speaking of kings,
Why won't you die? Nanomachine, son.
I know him, you know him, we all know him, but who? We are long overdue for a new Metal Gear episode, since the last one was like 6 years ago. So let's send him into the wheel. Senator Armstrong versus G.
この隣の場所に自由に入ってこれるの、この私の能力だけだ。
Senator Armstrong versus Funny Valentine. This matchup is so much better than Armstrong versus G. Reason being is that there's way more thematic, 2, better animation potential, and Trace, I just personally like it more. Now, why does it have those exact things? Well, I'll get into it a little later. And other than G, the only other matchup I could find was Shadow Shido from Persona 5, which, no. Because the only connection is that evil politician. And unlike Valentine and Armstrong, it's missing the American factor that, well, feels them both. But with all that being said, I'm gonna now move on to my favorite part of the video, where I get to talk about connections, yeah! Both were antagonists of their given story, who opposed the protagonist ideals and were very committal to their said ideals. Right before they died to the opponent, who they died because some random ass person gave them a thing that was specifically made to counter them. They had a long battle of ideals right before they started fighting, and ended off with them trying to convince them one last time in a more softer manner to join their side. Also, we're inadvertently the winner of the story, and also they have a ability that makes them pretty much unkillable. They both want the best for America, however, they both want it in entirely different ways. Funny Valentine wants to take the first napkin and guarantee hope and prosperity for the future of his country. This directly contradicts Armstrong's own beliefs. His is that he wants everyone to fight for what they believe for and make the US a place where the strong live and everyone fights their own wars. Now, if you do want to boil things down as simple as possible, Valentine wants to secure a better tomorrow, while Armstrong wants to give everyone true freedom. Now it's time for who would kick whose ass. Now, when it comes to who wins, it's very close, except for one reason, but we'll get into that, don't worry. Now, to start off, Armstrong holds a significant advantage when it comes to raw power and durability. He was able to break Raiden's first blade, which earlier was able to cut through machinery built for nuclear warfare. And this isn't like some weird outlier. Later on in the fight, he was able to punch a gear so hard that it just exploded in his face, and he just lived.
Alright, I think we're about done here.
Another piece supporting that durability feat is that he was able to just tank hits from Raiden's blade that was able to cut through that said machinery. However, Valentine has general speed, hacks, and just general intelligence lead over him. Essentially, Valentine's main ability is that if he's between two objects, he can pull anything out of a different parallel universe. Now, what quantifies as anything? Basically, as it says, basically anything in his mind could think of, whether it be a gun, himself, etc. Also, he has the ability of, if you touch your own self from a different parallel universe, you instantly die. However, you do have to be between two objects, which is going to be pretty hard. And this also applies when if he dies, he can just pull himself from a different parallel universe and just live. Now, he does have another ability called Love Train, which I don't know if they're going to give it to him, because it might just be a little bit overkill. Basically, Love Train is an ability where once he gains all the core parts, any misfortune that is upon him gets redirected to somewhere else. Which basically means if you shoot him, that bullet is going to get redirected to a completely different place. And also, it kind of does a really cool thing called ignoring durability. Now, when it comes to speed, I would say it's a little bit shaky because you do have to do a lot of scaling in order to get to it properly. Basically, he scales to Johnny, who was able to tango with the world, which we should be comparable to Dio's world, which was comparable to Jotaro's stand, which has this feat on screen. Now, in terms of animation potential, this fight would be really cursed if done in 3D because, JoJo characters don't really have good 3D models to work with. So I would say sprites, but you would have to make a custom model for Armstrong. So basically, this fight is either going to look very time consuming or going to be very cursed. And lastly, the music. Ted GM made an amazing thing for this fight. And well, hopefully the official one can match it. And lastly, before I get into the next number, I would love if at first this fight was like a really friendly debate between them, and then it got a lot more serious. Very similar in content to All Might vs. Might Guy. Now, it's time to move on from a set of antagonists who want the best for their country, to a set of protagonists who really want to destroy people.
My message. Because guess what? As far as I know, I'm already dead. Which means I'm waiting for your sorry ass in the afterlife.
Spawn is one of my favorite protagonists ever, for a very personal reason and also because his design is really cool. But with all that being said, who will be throwing down with the Hellspawn today? Let's find out. Spawn versus Ghost Rider. Remember at the start of the video when I said there's only going to be 2 characters I'm going to be reusing? Well, this is the part where I'm going to be using those 2 characters. Now, his other matchups are actually pretty good, unlike the other spots. The first one that comes to mind is Spawn versus Demi-Fiend, which is actually really good. But it doesn't kind of, gel with me like, this one. I've also seen people throw him around with Doomguy, which is also pretty good, but I'd rather have him just fight Guts. However, we've been talking about something that isn't the main topic at hand, so let's change that for a second. Both were normal people who made deals with the devil, and both during the deals got sandwiched between 2 organisms, with Ghost Rider being Zarathos and Spawn being the K7 Letha. And both were essentially made to be agents of vengeance. Both of their most iconic weapons are chains and the fire. Both are also weak to holy weapons. Both have cosmic holy forms. Both became so powerful they beat down the gods of their universe. Both had not so good movies from the late 90s, early 2000s period. Not only have both already been on Death Battle, they both won. And finally, both were featured as guest characters in a fighting game twice. Now, when it comes to the verdict, it's really close. Like, it's one of those matchups where you really got knee deep into lore in order to figure out the answer. Like I said earlier, both can evolve into more higher forms, with Spawn being God Spawn and Ghost Rider being Zarathos. Spawn has been shown that he can tango with both God and the Devil in his verse. However, Ghost Rider was able to mess with Mephisto. And Mephisto is really powerful, to put it very lightly. It is consistently stated that he is equal to heavy hitters like Odin and Galactus. And to give some quick feats real quick to support that argument, when he fought Hela, it said that the clashes they made makes Ragnarok look like child's play. And this isn't some weird outlier. And another thing is that when he fought a well-fed Galactus, he stalemated him. And in the battle, it was specifically stated that they almost tore up the universe while fighting. But this goes without saying, Spawn also has some pretty good feats on his own. He was able to tango with both God and Satan in his verse, which both of them just are pretty hard to kill. God alone was able to snuff out multiple universes just by thinking. I'm not going to spend as long time on speed because they're about the same. Spawn's been able to challenge angels, and some of them can go within this feat on screen. And Ghost Rider's bike's been able to outspeed Thor's hammer, and they've already done a calc on it on screen now. Now, the interesting part is they both have ways to kill each other, but it's really dependent on who can get closer first. Spawn has this very cool thing called a holy weapon, and Ghost Rider has a really cool thing called the Penance Stare, and the Penance Stare is really effective. Basically, it was able to overwhelm Doctor Strange, and without getting too much into scaling, basically Doctor Strange is really powerful. And I'll have a couple feats on screen right now to prove my point. Now, if you would say gun to the head, you had to choose someone, I'd probably lean a little towards Ghost Rider just because of the Penance Stare. But Spawn has fully capable of taking this as well. And now the death could also be really good, because Lobo's death is already my favorite sprite-based death out of any. But this does lean on the would Ghost Rider win, which Spawn could easily win as well. And speaking of the animation, it could be really good. I would personally love just a scene of just Zarathos and Godspawn just brawling down, take hits, and just go until they die. Something akin to Hulk versus Broly. Now, for the final 2 things, for animation style, I would prefer for this to be sprite, but they do also have really good 3D models to work with. And finally, the track. The track for Lobo versus Ghost Rider was really good, and hopefully they can carry over. And personally, I would love for the track name to be called Unchained Hell. And oh yeah, speaking of hell,
To win the game, you must kill me, John Romero. Now, two titans, as it is written.
if you're a returning viewer from the last video, then you're probably going to know who it is. But with that being said, let's see who's going to throw it on with the Titans today. Icon of Sin versus Adam Cadmon. This matchup is so weirdly good and I don't understand. Now when it comes to his other opponent, keyword opponent because I haven't really seen much from him, there's Godzilla Ultima, which again this leans a little too much into Godzilla, which like I said in the Rayquaza vs Bahamut section, Godzilla's already fought his best opponent. And when it comes to Cadmon, now Cadmon alone doesn't have any good ones, however Maruki actually has a couple of good working ones. One, but I'll get into this in a second. The most popular one I have seen is Maruki vs Poochie, which it is JoJo vs Persona, which haha funny, but like I personally don't like it. And another one that I like a lot is Maruki vs Ino. Like if Adam Cadmon vs Icon never happens, I'd actually like Maruki vs Ino to be like a secondary. However, we're not talking about Ino versus Maruki, we're talking about Icon of Sin versus Adam Cadmon. Now when it comes to connections, there's actually not that much compared to the other ones, but there's still a good amount. The connection is that both were big mechs that basically alter reality. Both were born out of one person's own desire. In Icon's case, he got brought back because his dad really wanted his son back, while Maruki wants to give everyone an ideal reality and make them not feel pain. Both were also made after in defiance of someone or something, with Doomguy defying the Conmaker and the Phantom Thieves defying Yaldabaoth. Also, but the people before them were very heavenly beings. And one last thing, they both were harmed by guns. However, they start nicely contrasting, with one just by existing breaks reality, while the other tries to make everyone feel better. Another thing is that one is controlled by an actual human, while the other is very independent. And lastly, both were killed in the head. Now it's the most subjective part of the video, and I try to figure out who would win. For Adam, it was pretty much stated that like he was several levels above Yaldabaoth, and in the lore, Yaldabaoth was able to essentially force himself into the Velvet Room. And by extension, that means he's at least stronger than both the Velvet Room attendant Lavenza and Igor. And assuming Philemon's in the verse, he's stronger than him. And Lavenza, who is comparable to Elizabeth, was able to one-shot Erebus. And Erebus is essentially Nyx. If you know anything about Persona, Nyx is pretty powerful. And even when the Phantom Thieves got 2 new members, they still were struggling against Adam. However though, it was stated that he did actually have a weakness, and I'm not going to mention it just yet, it's going to be a little later. However, I do think it's safe to say that he has more power over Icon. You might be inclined to ask, hey, what makes this match so fair then? Basically, Icon of Sin made both Doomguy and the Conmaker shake in their pants. And the Conmaker is basically a god. And also, Doomguy is really powerful in his own right. And another thing is that Icon can't really die per se. He can be put down, he can be hurt, but he can't be killed. Basically, the only way you can kill him is if you have a crucible weapon. And I'm like 98% sure Maruki doesn't have one. Also, he has more ranged abilities, which is always very, very good. For example, he has an attack that he can just summon meteors down, he can summon some demons to help him out, and probably more. Now, you might ask, oh, well, why do you bring these up? Basically, one of Adam's big weaknesses is that when he attacks, he drops his defense. However, let's just say Icon is not a very smart person, and I do think it's fair to say that Icon is faster than Adam. So I do think that this fight is going to come down to, can Maruki kill Icon before he can notice his weakness? Now, when it comes down to animation potential, like a Ghost Rider vs Spawn, this is going to be one of the most destructive fights. And if you know me, I'm a big sucker for good sound design and really good impact. And these two make up for it tenfold. And lastly, the soundtrack. Basically, hearing these two different series mash in the soundtrack department is going to be very nice. And lastly, Maruki. I don't know if you could tell, but I really like Maruki. Like, really like Maruki. And, well, that's about it. Oh yeah, and I feel like another thing they're going to hurdle is, can Icon even see Adam? Which, well, I'm going to be honest, he probably can. And hey, these talk about unseen people kind of makes me want the next matchup. So, moving on. His name is Yoshikage Akira, and he's 33 years old. He lives in the northeast section of Moria. No, I'm not doing this. I ain't about to read a whole ass copy pasta for a single joke. But, you know what I will do? I will throw him in the wheel and see who he fights, and if you're a returning viewer, you're gonna know who it is immediately. But without further ado, let's see who's gonna fight this killer. Yoshikage Akira versus Toru Adachi. Now you might be asking, hey, why isn't this number 1? Because I thought this was your most wanted matchup. It was. I still really like it, and in all honesty, this one and the next one are pretty much interchangeable, but come on. Now these are each other's best opponents. For one, Adachi versus Hazama is very cringe, because Hazama kind of stomps, and there's really not much outside of Hazama. Now, the connection is that they both are normal people who later in their said story turn out to be the antagonist, with several clues hinting that they are indeed, well, the villain. Both use their average job and normal looking attire to fool everyone. Both, when they first were found out, went into hiding. Both were killed at the end of the story, however, both at a later spin-off got semi-redeemed. Both contrast the protagonist pretty well, and both contrast each other by one wanting to live a quiet life, and the other wanting the whole world to essentially die. Also, as a final little connection, they both are my personal favorite antagonists. Now, why is that? Well, if I were here, I'd probably be here for another, 50 minutes. And if you do want to listen to me rant about why they're so good, go to my other channel and watch my videos. Hahaha, shameless plug, am I right? Now, it's on to the next part where I get to talk about who would win. Now, this matchup is very close. And are you sensing a pattern now? Like I said in the last section, persona stats are the hardest thing to nail. So at first we're going to do Kira. Basically, Kira moves at around light speed. He is able to keep pace with both Crazy Diamond and Star Platinum. And he was shown earlier, before, he got beat down by Star Platinum, that he could perfectly parry every single attack that Koichi did. And again, like for speed, you could also just scale him to Jotaro or Crazy Diamond. And also he has more hacksy abilities. Basically, for the 5 people who haven't watched JoJo yet, what he does is he essentially, if he touches you, he places a bomb in you and explodes you. And this directly bypasses durability. And also he has 2 other bombs with Sheer Heart Attack and Bites the Dust. Now Sheer Heart Attack's a lot more prevalent and would actually work in battle. Basically, Sheer Heart Attack is pretty much indestructible. Jotaro Kujo, who has this feat on screen, when he was seriously trying to break it, he could not crack it. He was punching it so hard that even his fists start to bleed, which never happened in JoJo. And Bites the Dust is a little bit more situation dependent, but it's still pretty good. And also he has more stamina and is smarter than Adachi. Basically, after getting beaten down by Crazy Diamond and Star Platinum, he was still going, which is just funny to me, but hey. However, Adachi has ludicrously more power than him. Even if you wanted to scale him to like Chie, who with her Galactic Punch was able to kick a lot of shit into orbit, and even if you don't want to count them to that, you could also just use the Yukari / Mitsuru bridge feat that they already used in the Vice vs Mitsuru episode. Also, he has more abilities to keep him at range. Also, he has more abilities to mess with Kira's mind. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that they both have advantages in their own right. However, again, if you were to put a gun up to my head and say who would win, I'd probably lean towards Kira, just because he does need to get one touch and he's faster than him. But I could perfectly see Adachi winning this as well. Now, in terms of animation, this has to be 2D, because both actually have some pretty good character models to work with in 2D. And also, another reason I want this fight is literally just because I love both them so much. I love both these characters a lot, and seeing them both in Death Battle would be noteworthy. And lastly, both Brandon and Tejian made a really good track for this matchup. And now, right before we get into number 1, let's get out some honorable mentions. For our first pick for honorable mentions, we're going to have Scorpion versus Wolf. Essentially, the reason why I wasn't on here was because, one, it was reusing Scorpion, and like I stated earlier, I don't want to be reusing that many characters. But besides those 2 things, this probably would have made the list. Basically, both are ninjas who had their families killed, and both got either their soul or their arm taken off, and both fight demons as for a living. and also both use shinobi tools in order to fight the opponent. However, consistently, Scorpion does lose to just lesser opponents. However, Wolf concentrated on shit that's 10 times its size and goes through with it. So I'm leaning a little towards, Wolf. The next one up is going to be Roy versus Levi. Good connections. Basically, they both are main rivals, the main character, and both are pushed because of the death of a comrade. However, it did make the list for 2 reasons. 1, because I don't like Levi, and 2, well, it's a little bit of a stomp. And also, I don't want Attack on Titan to come on to catch a second L. But hey, a Roy dub's cool, and that's pretty much it. Because his only other opponent is Roy from Fire Emblem, which, Roy versus Roy. And hey, if I had a nickel for every time there was a Full Metal matchup that included 2 characters that had the same name, I'd have 3 nickels. It's not much, but it's weird it happened 3 times. But next up is going to be Fear Her Bradley versus Solidus Snake. Basically, the connections are they both are false patriots who use swords, are really good with them, wear eye patches, and committed war crimes. Also, both were leaders at one point, because literally they are IRD's Metal Gear. And also, the same Metal Gear matchup kind of fit the same role. Makoto Nijima versus Tifa Lockhart. Punchy tomboys. Also, both are really, really nice. Now, obviously, the reason I didn't include it is because I already represent both Final Fantasy and Persona. And also, just bringing Tifa back on just to catch a second L is kind of cringe. However, why'd I mention it? Because I like Makoto Nijima. Like, a lot. Next up is Valentine versus Faust. Fighting game nurses that are also psychotic. I didn't include it because I felt like just because I already filled the role of a doctor role with Richtofen versus Medic, and I don't know, I just didn't really want to put it in. Slayer versus Dimitri. Dapper, classy vampires who really like to stay up at night. Now, originally I did actually have this on the list, but I didn't include it because it didn't really have really good connections, and 2, it's a colossal stomp. Next up is going to be Griffith versus Akechi. Both are traitors, people with birth motifs, and both were really wanting to be killed. Again, reason I didn't include it, I already had Persona, and that's about it. Squidward versus Benson, I didn't really include it because, well, I don't know. Satsuki versus Bruno Bucciarati. Classy, bowl-cut people who really like disciplining the main character. Again, I didn't include it because I'm an idiot. Also, both nearly died trying to help the main character, or did die. The reason I didn't include it was because I don't want Kill la Kill to come back on just to catch a second L. And also, I already used JoJo a little too much. Doomsday versus SCP-682. Both are unkillable reptilian. I didn't include it because the reasoning would have been because I want DC to lose, which I probably should have put. I don't want just a matchup just for one character to lose. I want both to, at least win. And another thing is that they don't do matchups with fan-made characters, or that's what they say. But if there was like a number 11, this would definitely be it. I like both Doomsday and I like SCP-682, and it's kind of cool. Next up is Joseph Joestar versus Star-Lord. Basically, both are wisecracking tricksters who really like messing with their opponent. Both of their first outings have them both fight a transcendent being and out-trick them by just messing with their mind. Both fight for a family member, and honestly, the banter between these two would be just immaculate. And one last thing, this is the best main JoJo fight, and you might be inclined to say, wait, aren't you missing a certain JoJo versus Persona matchup? No, because that matchup is really overrated, and the only reason people want it is because the connections are just 5th character and 5th thing in the series, even though one of them is very technically the 6th pro tag. Okay, so after all of that, let's get into the last pick of honorable mention. And finally, man, that was weird. But with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's finally get into the numero uno of the group, the cream of the crop. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on Constantine. He is one of my favorite DC characters. And for the final time of the day, let's spin that wheel. John Constantine versus Raido Kuzunoa. This is by far both of their best matchups. For John, the other options I've seen were Hellboy, Rick Sanchez, and Doctor Strange. Now, Doctor Strange already has been on Death Battle, and I just don't want him to fight him. Hellboy is actually really thematic, however, Hellboy actually has better matchups than both Constantine. Hellboy has Nero and Alucard to fight, and personally, if I had to pick one, I'd probably do Hellboy versus Alucard, but Hellboy versus Nero is also really good. Also, Hellboy gets stomped to the ground harder than you can imagine. And Rick, I just don't want to use him. Because if Rick loses, there's going to be a whole shit show of all the Rick babbies being like, ooh, he should have won. And in all honesty, I would rather just Rick fight Dr. Doofenshmirtz. But hey, that's just me. However, not to get off topic, let's talk connections. Both are demon summoning magical detectives who constantly go against gods and other demons and manage to beat them by just through raw hacks and stats. Both uses demons as an ally, and both negotiate with the demons before they, start working for them. Both have sick-ass trench coats, and they start nicely contrasting each other, with one being a fully grown adult and the other being, a high schooler. It may lack more thematic connections like the past spots, however, it makes up tenfold in two things. The first one being the debate around it. Again, for the final time for today, this is one of the closest fights on this entire list. However, this time, it's not because they both are similar in stats. It is mainly because both are busted in the complete opposite direction from each other. Or, to put it in simple terms, these two characters, or Constantine at the very least, are pretty hard to lock numbers down for. So, I'm gonna try my best. Starting with John, he has several things going for him. For one, he definitely has an intelligence lead over Raido. This guy has been able to out-con people like the Presence, Trigon, and the Spectre. Which, mind you, they are all the heavy hitters of the DC verse. And all are omniscient gods. He was able to trick Dr. Fate in going into a pocket dimension. And have this Anubis-looking head-ass kill him, which Fate scales to some of the most ridiculous feats on screen. And speaking of magical strength, this actually nicely segues into the next part. This guy has enough magic to hurt Blight and Mr. E. Now, Mr. E is fairly hard to get numbers for, however, Blight, Prime Earth, is actually fairly easy. Basically, Blight, Prime Earth, is essentially the embodiment of all of mankind's evil. And I think that just speaks for itself. At one time, when someone was literally right about to stab him, he just straight up made a pocket dimension on his chest and the sword just went right through. Now, he does have a weakness. Basically, he is still human. Basically, he's not really durable without magic. And also, he is really arrogant sometimes. And that's scraping the surface of, his feats. There's going to be a video on screen that actually better explains Constantine's entire power. But other than that, moving on. Now, you may ask, how does Raido stand even a ghost of a chance against this guy? For one, he definitely has stronger demons, and also he can control them better. Now, the demons that he's going to get is probably going to be very up in the air, but I definitely expect Yoshitsune and McCoy. And if they really want to skate on thin ice, they might give him characters like Satan, Metatron, and Beelzebub. And all three of those people were at the very least the right-hand men of both God and Lucifer. And speaking of which, Raido is able to fight and beat Lucifer. And Lucifer is the rival to these versus God or Yahweh or Wreck or Scratch or whatever his name was. Just for today's purposes, I'm just going to call him Yahweh. But in essence, Yahweh is essentially the main creator of the verse. And Lucifer is like his polar opposite. And another thing, Raido is able to scale to other people like Demifiend. And in the story of Nocturne, it's pretty explicitly say that they're essentially the same power level. And I do know in a part of the story, essentially Goto essentially told Raido to not kill Demifiend, when he very easily could. And essentially, Kagutsuchi is an aspect of this thing called the Great Will, which is essentially the rival to God. And after that, both Raido and Demifiend were able to fight Lucifer, like immediately after the fight of Kagutsuchi. So in durability, I do think Raido slightly edges out John. And another thing, Kagutsuchi has multiple faster than light attacks. And another thing, he's able to keep pace with Kagutsuchi. And lastly, he has slightly more CQC experience than John. And lastly, Raito does have stat negating abilities. And he does have a couple of hacksy abilities. Essentially, he could send people through to dimensional space-time rifts. And he has Raito the Aeon, which essentially multiplies his damage dealt by the user by 1.5 times. And it also bypasses the opponent's resistances. In terms of animation, this has the most potential of the whole list, only being rivaled by Spawn vs Ghost Rider and Icon Ascend vs Adam Cadmon. The visuals are only limited to their imagination, and I would absolutely love for this to be in Sprite just so they can put more effort into the visual department. Now another thing is, I love both the characters that it's using. Like I said earlier, Constantine's one of my favorite DC characters, and Raito is my favorite SMT Pro Tag. Also, this may have the potential to end DC's non-Marvel win streak, but if it doesn't happen, I would be perfectly happy with if Constantine won, but it's just something to keep note of. And lastly, the track. Just listen to Brandon's track. So, as a final send-off, let's listen to 14th Hellblazer, shall we? Now, if you made it to the end of the video, I applaud you. This video was actual hell to make. After constant issues with getting clips, and getting constant issues with Premiere, also the length of the video, this ended up being the hardest and the longest project I've ever tackled. And I am so sorry for making you wait this long for the video. But hopefully, you enjoyed it, because I certainly have. Also, I am extremely sorry if I messed up any kind of information regarding feats. Please correct me on the comments. And lastly, please for the love of God, if you're gonna have a debate in the comment, please make it civil. Like, please for the love of God, make it civil. Also, if I included your thumbnail without crediting you, just say it was your thumbnail in the comments. And right before I go, if this video does really well, as in if this video gets a little bit more than 50 likes, I will gladly make another top 10 list of Death Battle. It's probably going to be a top 10 Death Battle episode that I really like. I hope you had a great day, and I hope you enjoyed watching. See you later.